So it's been a while since I've done a deck spotlight, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First, when Houses of Morrowind came out, I didn't really feel comfortable with any of the early builds of decks that I was running, to the point where I felt like I could make either a video or post a deck list and feel confident that it was even close to being optimal. Like, there was stuff that I was playing that was working, but usually when I do a deck spotlight, I try to get things down to the point where, plus or minus a small handful of cards, what I would consider to be flex picks, the deck is just, functioning. And when Houses of Morrowind released, I did not feel that way. And then by the time that things did settle down in the meta, everybody and their brother kind of already figured out what the meta decks were, and I didn't feel a reason to highlight the meta decks. It had already been done, and I don't want to waste your time. However, there's been a pretty decent influx of newer players as of late. I'm seeing a lot of posts on Reddit and in other places that I kind of lurk, where people are looking for, what are the current meta decks? And between the influx of new players in the announcement of the Master Series and the qualifier tournaments, I'm also seeing people saying, like, what are some lists? What can I take? How do I plan? So I'm going to do a couple of deck spotlights. Hopefully this is the first of at least a couple that I will do. And yes, these are going to be highlighting decks that most of you have already seen, but I'm still going to go through and I'm going to explain them because, again, if you're a new player, hopefully this helps you. I'm also going to talk about the difference between ladder versions and tournament versions. So if you are somebody who is pretty familiar with ladder, but you're getting ready to play in one of the Master Series qualifiers and it's your first tournament experience, I'm going to talk about cards that you may want to consider in a tournament that you may not have considered on the ladder. So for this video, we're going to take a look at Shout Scout, Reanimator Scout, Necro Scout. It's called a lot of different things, but essentially this is a controlling, like, combo version of Scout that utilizes a very large toolbox of cards that Necromancer takes advantage of. Specifically, this Odinaran, I never say it correctly, Necromancer. There's a reason I say Necromancer for short. But yes, this card is a linchpin of the deck. It is very, very good and very, very abusable, and we'll talk about the ways that you can do that. And then the rest of the deck uses the Shout package. So starting with the Shout package, just kind of talking about what that means. The deck does run Drain Vitality, the control boogeyman card of the meta, if you will. This card is very, very strong if it hits level 3. One of the ways you get it to level 3 is by using Word Wall. This is a great stall card, and again, it's a great play to combo with Drain Vitality. The fact that, both Word Wall and Drain cost 1 magicka means that, as early as turn 3, you can play a level 3 Drain Vitality. Now, it is a 3-card investment to do so, but if you were playing a late game or a later game deck like this, being able to blow up somebody's early game and buy you time and stall is huge. And even if you invest 3 cards, if you're taking out 3 or more of your opponents, totally worth it. So Word Wall, Drain Vitality, linchpins of the Shout package, but there are other pieces as well. So other parts of the Shout package include Soul Tear. Soul Tear most commonly combines with Giant Bat, because getting back a 2/2 with Charge and Drain, not a huge deal, but when Soul Tear hits level 3, then getting a 7/7 charging draining creature for 3 magicka, kind of a big deal. Not only are you removing threats, but it gives you reach at the end of the game to close out your opponents. Also, the Drain is a massive stabilization tool. So the deck does run Soul Tear. Giant Bat gets the honorable mention, but again, Soul Tear can hit other cards. We will talk about some other options in a little bit. And then the last part that usually is run in the Shout package is Greybeard Mentor, just because while the 2/2 body doesn't feel that great, the fact that it tutors for one of your Shouts, very, very good, very consistent. The fact that you can sometimes kind of, I'm not going to say control, but you can, like, use use knowledge to your advantage also really helps. So if I've already drawn like 2 Drained Vitalities and then I play Graybeard Mentor, I can probably bank on the fact it's going to find me a Soul Tear. Obviously doesn't happen all the time, but you can make those mental decisions and use that knowledge to your advantage when you are playing the card. And that's kind of the core of the Shout package. Now, the rest of the deck is kind of loosely based on either cards that stall. So we've got things like Fighters Guild Recruit, Prophecy, great, Guard, great, Lethal, great stall card. It also has cards like Sanctuary Pet, Shackle, good, Lethal, good. We've got Territorial Viper, again, charging with lethal. This is basically like targeted removal. We've got Red Brahmin for later that will potentially shackle, silence a lane. This is a great stall card. Parthenax kind of falls into that middle ground. This is both a card that if you hit Drained Vitalities when you play it, and you've already played 1 or 2 throughout the course of the game, can give you a way to also board clear. It also kind of counts as part of that Shout package as well, because you know, if you've already leveled up your Soul Tears or leveled up your Drained Vitalities, then Parthenax's value goes up because you could get level 3 versions of those. So there are some stall cards, but the big deal here, right, the unwritten rule of what we're kind of looking at is that all of those stall cards and some of the other cards all function very, very well with Necromancer. So Necromancer is a 6-cost 3/3, but when it enters play, you summon a creature from your discard pile with less power than Necromancer. So let's look at the cards in here that has less power than a base Necromancer, right? Word Wall. Yes, sometimes just Necromancering a Word Wall is the right thing to do. You can play the Word Wall early to stall, level up your Drained Vitality, they mow down your Word Wall, but then later you play Necromancer, you get the Word Wall back, level up that Drain to level 3, and on top of it you still got that Guard, so it's a big stall tactic. Fighters Guild Recruit. In a pinch, it has Guard, it has Lethal, it's great. Thieves Guild Recruit. So this card is mostly just here to help you cycle and, you know, maybe get a discount on one of your 3 late game cards. But if you really need to dig, using Necromancer on Thieves Guild Recruit lets you draw a card, right? Not horrible. Giant Bat. If you need some drain, I mean it's only 2 health, but every little bit matters when you're trying to stabilize in some really intense matchups. Also, because this has charge, it can act as potentially point removal, so Necromancer to get a bat, not necessarily a bad thing. Indaural Mastermind. Indaural Mastermind is more card draw, and it does something else we'll talk about in a second. Sanctuary Pet, also less power than the Necromancer. You get to shackle something, you get lethal, all good stuff. Graybeard Mentor. We've already talked about the Shout package and its importance. This guy finds shouts for you, and the Necromancer brings him back, and he finds more shouts. Just like our friend Sanctuary Pet, Territorial Viper also can charge and kill things. Deciding between the two a lot of times just depends on the lane you're going into. If your opponent has just freshly played something into the shadow lane, Sanctuary Pet's usually the better option because you also get the shackle. If you're in the field lane, then the Viper can charge down. Once you get both of these in your graveyard and you have the flexibility, you're kind of telling your opponent to pick their poison. And Thorn Histmage. So this is a defensive card that also ramps up your max magicka, so you can just do shenanigan scout things. But when it enters play, it's usually entering play as a 3/4, because on summon you gain 1 max magicka, and then you get +1/+0 when your max magicka increases. But the fact that it is a base of 2 means that this guy can be brought back by Necromancer, and that's one of the really dirty tricks when you don't need those lethal creatures, when you don't need a word wall, or you don't need to tutor with Mentor, and you're just trying to establish board presence or try to get ahead of other slower late game decks. Thorn Histmage is a fantastic target for Necromancer because you get basically you get a 6/7's worth of stats for 6 magicka, and you get to protect a lane partially because of guard, and your max magicka went up, right? Like, all of those things are great. So Histmage being targetable by this, incredibly solid. So those are all the things that just get hit by base Necromancer. Now, there are some other shenanigans that we can talk about here in a minute. First, I also want to mention, just briefly, more synergy with Necromancer. Scout's Report is not just like look at a card and potentially draw it, but it's better in this version of Scout than previous versions, because if you do discard it, you don't just have Soul Tear. Now, since so many cards in your deck can be brought back by Necromancer, you don't have to feel bad about not picking that card. Like, if Sanctuary Pet comes up and you don't need it right then, but you're playing against an aggro deck and you're like, well, I might need it in the future, not at all an issue. In the past, like, having to Soul Tear to get a Sanctuary Pet felt bad, but having the Necromancer to get a Sanctuary Pet doesn't feel nearly as bad, in my opinion anyway. So Scout's Report has increased in value in a deck like this. Endoral Mastermind is card selection / cycle, right? So you get to draw a card when you play it, and you get to choose between two options. So that's the selection part. You get to choose based on quality. But much like Scout's Report, the card you discard in here is likely not gone for good. In fact, in many ways, you can expand your toolbox. So like if you have a Necromancer in hand, sometimes the right play is to purposefully discard cards, right? So if you play Scout's Report when you have a Necromancer in hand, if you play Endoral Mastermind when you have a Necromancer in hand, sometimes the right play is to just discard the bat. It is to just discard the Thorn Hist Mage, because then when you play Necromancer, you'll get that extra value. So again, this is all just talking about base Necromancer. Now, this deck does include Galen the Shelterer, and that's really important because there are juicy targets for Galen. Red Brahmin is, okay. Tazcad, I mean, it's always hard to turn down more Chargers. The only thing better than one Parthenax is like 4 Parthenaxes in your deck. But Necromancer is, shocking, I know, a fantastic target for Galen the Shelterer. Galen doesn't just shuffle in more copies, which would be good enough, but Galen provides +3/+3, which means that when you draw an enhanced Necromancer, you can now target things like Shadowfen Priest, which is mostly in here for killing supports. You can target things like Hallowed Death Priest, which is here to combat other enemy late game threats. Getting rid of somebody else's Parthenax is good. But if you had to play it early and you whiffed, being able to play a Necromancer and take another crack at it really helps. A Galen Necromancer is enough to even bring back Red Brahmin, because he's a 5, and the Galen Necros are going to have a 6 power. So Galen on Necromancer is fantastic. The one thing you have to remember with Galen plays is that you have to remember what your opponent could potentially be playing, specifically against control decks that are willpower based. If you're playing against Halalu, not really a big deal to worry about cast into time, but if you're playing against Tribunal control, maybe even some weird like control monks, or some mid-range monks I've even seen throwing it in, things like that. Basically, willpower based decks that you suspect may have cast into time, you will want to either bait out the cast into time on other threats if you have Galen and Necromancer, or you may have to try to wait until you've drawn multiple Necromancers before you play the first one, because it will only eat the rest out of your deck and not the ones from your hand. But that is something to keep in mind. If you Galen a Necromancer and then you drop the one that was in your hand immediately the next turn and it gets hit by cast into time, all of your copies are gone. The buffed ones, the non-buffed ones, it is a huge blow. So you have to play around cast into time when you're considering Necromancer, and you certainly have to play around it when you're considering cards you've just played Galen on. Now, there's another piece to this deck that I haven't talked about yet, and that is, it is Ulfric's Uprising. So you may have seen this down here. Ulfric's Uprising is a card that triggers the summon effect of each friendly creature. Even though we went over a bunch of them, let's go do a quick rundown of cards that have summon effects. Wordwall, pretty good summon effect. Thieves Guild, pretty good summon effect. Galen, yes, that's right. You can play Galen, shuffle some stuff in, and then if you play Ulfric's Uprising, shuffle even more in. Mastermind. Sanctuary Pet still has a nice shackle. Mentor will search for things. Hallowed Death Priest, much like I was talking about earlier, if you play it in whiff, but it stays on the board because a lot of times control players may just ignore it because it's not necessarily like the biggest threat. You can hit an Uprising maybe a couple of turns later and then maybe get something better. Shadowfen Priest is actually not terrible if it stays on the board. Thorn Histmage will still ramp your max magicka, and it will also increase its power. That's right, Necromancer. So Necromancer's effect is a summon effect, so if you have Necromancers on the board, Ulfric's Uprising will trigger them. If you have enhanced Necromancers on the board, you get the enhanced summon effects, so you can do, like I said, bunkers things. If you have regular Necromancers in the discard pile and enhanced ones, whether it be from Galen or from Soul Tear, so that's another thing to mention, Soul Tear's level 2 and level 3 will increase the power of the card that you bring back. It includes Necromancer, so you can pump up Necromancers with a level 3 Soul Tear as high as an 8/8, which brings back everything in your deck but Parthenax. If you have an enhanced Necromancer on the board, you get really good Ulfric's Uprising value. And if you have more Necromancers in the discard, you can chain them. You can have your Necromancer bring back the lesser Necromancer, which then brings back one of your other cards that was already 2 power or less anyway. It's a very good rebound mechanic. So Uprising does great things in this deck. It's also worth noting that you don't have to save it for like mega value. Sometimes playing an Uprising when you only have 1 or 2 summon effects is still just good enough. You have to gauge it based on where the point in the match is. That will take time. You just have to get some experience. But sometimes, just drawing a card and reshackling a creature if you're trying to stall is good enough. Sometimes just using it on a single Greybeard Mentor if you're trying to dig for drains and all you've drawn are, Soul Tears, sometimes that's good enough. Like, don't feel like you have to get a massive Uprising. Just get one that's good enough to help you survive or good enough to help you win. So, yeah. Red Brayman also gets hit by Ulfric's Uprising. That's another really obnoxious thing to do, is to lock down somebody's lane, and then when they think they're, like, about to finally get to use their creatures, you lock them down again. Poor souls. Last thing I want to talk about is, in fact, Soul Tear. This deck list does run Tazcad. Once you do get to a level 3 Soul Tear, and this is most important against other control decks, pay attention to Tazcad. An 11/11 Charger means you skip 2 runes. It is a great way to close out a game. It is a great knockout blow. Good players will play around it, but a lot of players will kind of forget that level 3 Tazcad does swing for 11, and you can do it all in one turn without ramping. 3 for the Soul Tear, 9 for the Tazcad, swing for 11. So you can sneak some games in with that play. Just keep it in mind. Now, the version that you're staring at, and at the end of this video, I'm going to put some example gameplay up, is also going to contain this version of the deck. This is what I would call the ladder version of the deck. This is the version that I play on the ladder because, in my opinion, this is a very well-rounded deck for dealing with whatever you run into on the ladder. As of right now, recording this, after almost 30 games, I'm at like a 84% win rate with it. Like, it's actually kind of absurd. But this deck is just very well-rounded for the ladder because it gives you a lot of tools for dealing with aggro and a lot of tools for potentially dealing with other control decks. You may see other people's versions of this deck that look different. For example, a lot have cut Tazcad, and a lot have reduced Hallowed Death Priest and things like that. And that's fine. I'm not going to argue with those. I'm just telling you that I include the cards I do in this list because I think this is well-rounded. Like I said, Tazcad off Soul Tear has helped me close out a lot of control mirrors. Hallowed Death Priest staying at 2 copies has helped me close out control mirrors. By sticking with the traditional Greybeard Mentor package, I find my drains, in my opinion, more consistently, which means that I'm doing better against like random aggro decks. It's just a really good, like, broad ladder deck. However, if I was going to play this in a tournament, I'm not sure that this is the version that I would consider playing. So, a lot of players in their versions have cut, for example, Greybeard Mentor, and in their place they are running Merchant's Camel. So you might ask yourself, well, why would I do that? Don't I always want to draw my shouts? A lot of times against aggro, yeah, you do. And that's, again, why I, play this on the ladder, because I'm seeing a lot of Halalu. But in a tournament where you've got bans, right? Like, that's even a more important piece for the Masters series. It is you bring 4 decks, it's a Conquest-style tournament with 1 deck ban. If you can ban Halalu, you don't have to worry about having guaranteed ways to fetch those drains. Merchant's Camel lets you just kind of dig through your deck, and it does a couple of things for you. It throws more cards in the discard pile, which opens up your toolbox for Necromancer, but it also lets you just dig deep for any card. And while it's only 3 cards deep, the fact that you're digging for whatever answer you need right then, as opposed to whatever answer you need against the deck you're most likely to see on ladder, that makes Merchant's Camel a much better option, in my opinion, in a tournament setting. Because tournaments are all about just beating that deck in front of you, and not about trying to win a best of 1 against whatever is thrown at you in UQ. So preparing for a tournament versus preparing for a ladder are 2 different things. Again, you get a deck ban in tournaments, or at least in the Master Series format. So you don't have to worry about Halalu if you don't want to. So Merchant's Camel over Greybeard Mentor, this is a swap that you could consider making. I would recommend making. You don't have to, right? If you feel better with Mentor, that's fine too. I'm not going to argue it, but I just want to let you know this is a flex spot. A lot of people have cut this. Similarly, in a tournament, a lot of people are cutting 1 copy of Hallowed Death Priest, and that's because a lot of times you only need 1. Playing it at the right time to just hit what you think is the biggest threat or most important threat to hit is often just more important than trying to make sure you draw it and potentially hitting whatever random thing your opponent is playing, right? So even more so exacerbated in the tournament format, unlike ladder, which is a best of 1 against whatever you queue against. The deck lists are visible in a lot of the tournaments that you play. So in the TESL Championship Series, for example, players were shown the opposing deck lists. That means you can better time or better account for when you need to play Hallowed Death Priest. So having 2 isn't as big of a deal, because you can have 1 and then you can always Soul Tear it if you really need, maybe hit Ulfric's Uprising, whatever the case may be. So cutting Hallowed Death Priest could be an option that you would consider. I would still consider running 1, but you could cut it down by 1. Again, I wouldn't argue it. Some players are cutting Tazcad. This is one where again, it's a personal preference. I disagree. Even in a tournament, I would expect a lot of other control decks. I think the presence of Tazcad in the control matchup is just too juicy to pass up, but that's a personal preference thing. But if you do see other lists, again, talking about packages people are including, and theirs runs Tazcad, great. If it doesn't run it, it doesn't mean it's inferior, doesn't mean it's wrong. Much better players than me are cutting it. Maybe they're onto something, but that's another one to consider. Cards that would go in instead, other cards that people are running are, as weird as it sounds, stuff like Treeminder. So Treeminder in a control mirror lets you kind of jump ahead of your opponent in terms of Magicka. You can play your bigger threats. With more max Magicka, you can drop more creatures with summon effects from hand and then play Uprising before your opponents can respond, so you can generate more value. Treeminder is yet another card you can get back with Necromancer, so even if you just need a guard and maybe you haven't found that Fighters Guild recruit yet, you can bring that back. So Treeminder is a very common flex card. I've seen people running 2 or 3 copies. I, again, would not blink. I would potentially consider including those as well in the tournament format, because you're having a more targeted response to decks as opposed to the broad, like, prepare for anything on the ladder approach that this iteration is taking. Other cards that I have seen people include that you may or may not consider for flex spots, I've seen some people include Dark Guardian. I'm not as much of a fan of that one, because to me that one's just too reactive. Cards like Sanctuary Pet and Viper are kind of taking care of the problem one way or the other immediately. Thorn Hissmage, is also kind of reactive because it's popping a guard down, but at least you get the max magicka. Same thing with Treeminder. But Dark Guardian, you're literally just saying, like, here's a body, I hope you can't go around it. And in my opinion, there's just too many ways to go around it right now. So while I do see Dark Guardian run in some lists, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you're looking at other lists, trying to figure out what works for you, just know that is another card that's often included. So yeah, understanding the importance of you know, playing in a broad sense against the ladder versus targeted stuff in tournaments does take some getting used to. Hopefully this explanation kind of helped explain what the difference is. If I do more deck spotlights related to decks that you would expect to see in the Master Series, I'll try to explain differences again. Anyways, we're at the point in the video where I showcase some games. So these are games I recorded when I was laddering earlier in the season. These games are going to be me using this version of the deck because, again, the version I have on screen right now is the version I think is pretty well suited for the ladder. Hopefully they just help show you how the deck performs, how you would kind of play through things and get a feel for the deck. So if you made it this far and you've made it through all of my rambling, thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Anyway, let's jump into some games. Alright, here we go. Looks like we are going first. That's against Telvanni. Curious to see if this ends up being mid-range Telvanni, which is a thing that floats around, or the control mirror. I think you kind of... maybe not. I think you keep this because if it is mid-range, then you kind of just win the game. Ideally, this would be something that draws you cards for the control mirror. Because that's kind of a dead card. If they pass again here, this is probably a control mirror. They might have missed a 2-drop if it's mid-range, but going to 3 where you've got Daggerfalls and Mammoths, yeah, so this is going to be a control mirror. If I fall, given that it's control and that is mostly meant to be reactive, we're just going to develop it and start poking him. Save everything else. Word Wall will give us flexibility in later moments.
The Hist provides. Chaos take you. You must.
We're actually going to go ahead and silence that because we don't want it to get bigger, and we don't want to let him get any extra magicka off of a potential uprising play at some point.
What have we here? Thorns and claws. Chaos take you. The Hist provides.
We're gonna play our own now. So we got a lot of shouts and a word wall. One uprising, but we not a lot to like pair with it yet. So there's a Treeminder.
What have we here?
The list I'm running, as you may have noticed, does not have Treeminders. Many people include them. I like Treeminder in the list, but for my like general ladder version, he's gonna draw a card off it. But for the general ladder version, I prefer not doing Treeminders and kind of going with a more well-rounded thing because I run into a lot of quirky decks. Like the past couple days, just as an example, I've been running into an awful lot of Rage Archer and things like that. And so it's the same reason I'm still running Mentor in place of the Camels. It's why I include Tazcad for like weird control mirrors, things like that. So I'm gonna punch him a bit, but then I think we're gonna bring back a Shadowfen Priest to nuke this. It's just a question of whether or not we want to upgrade a Soul Tear. And I honestly think I kind of want to before we do it. Because a 6/6, when we're trying to play as the beatdown here. So it's interesting, like in a control mirror like this, you can either try to ultra grind them out, say, okay, I can win the late game, or you can try to be the beatdown. Well, that's unfortunate. They play Ungolem and get an assassin right away, and they also have Red Freeman. Okay. First 9 cards of your deck. Well, with the assassins shuffled in, it's really more like 11 or 12. Either way, it doesn't really feel good.
They've no move.
To eat a Red Brahmin that early. I think here you take the Death Priest, because the fact of shutting him down here potentially feels pretty good.
Careful there, friend.
It's gonna make some value trades. It's gonna take that here. This will eat this.
We know.
The waters of life.
Doing a good job of spreading out. It's a shame this is silenced. So we could dig and see what we could find, or we could Hiss Mage and Uprising, which would give us more Magicka, eat another guy, and let us dig, kind of similar to the Scout's report, but then we're not doing anything else for the turn. So I don't know how I feel about that. I think we're just gonna dig. I think saving the Uprising for...
I'll scout ahead.
Actually, we'll keep that. I think saving the Uprising for more powerful plays is the right thing to do.
Observe.
Alright, so we have one Shout, and that is a Drained Vitality that is left in the deck. So we got those pretty front-loaded. Curious to see if he breaks a ring here or not. I mean, I fully expect a lot of value trades. Oh. Kind of surprised he didn't trade with this and leave the old Ungolem alive there.
The hist heals and rejuvenates.
Oh, that's interesting as well.
I'll scout ahead.
Keeping that lets me dig a little bit deeper. By one card, potentially.
They've no move we can't anticipate.
Okay, sure. So if I wanted to right now, play the Necro, find a bat. The bat would eat this over here. Leaves him with this though, which I don't necessarily know how I feel about that. The other option would be we could Uprising here and just draw a bunch of cards and hit anything that would be worth his time playing with the Death Priest here. Kind of like that. I think this is a time to use our Uprising. I think we want the Viper. We eat an Uncano, so that feels pretty good. We should also get our last Drain Vitality out of that as well. And I think we're just going to preemptively stick this back in our hand. That way we saturate our Magicka. Because I can't imagine a scenario where that isn't what we grab with that Soul Tear. Basically, this by itself will bring back anything else that exists in our deck that's not Parthenax.
Friend.
But also gives us an 8/8 body out of it.
Or harm. Ribs and claws.
So, from a Magicka saturation standpoint, that feels like the right play. Again, curious to see if he gives me runes or not. Chooses not. We do have Word Wall to level up the drains. If we wanted to use this Necro into a Word Wall.
So
Let's do this first.
predictable.
Could kind of just use the drains and clear everything but the Red Brahmin as well, which is pretty tempting. It's not like we need to go wide against them often except for post-conscription, but we're playing as the beatdown here. So doing this to establish some tempo. I think is entirely reasonable.
Rise, my servant.
Let's dig deeper.
They've no move we can't anticipate.
Let's dig deeper.
Here?
And you guessed it.
They've no
Let's dig
move
deeper.
we can't anticipate.
There we go. I like that Galen. Galen on Necromancer feels like a pretty solid play here. Because that will give us another whole host of things that we can do. The only other thing that we would potentially save Galen for would be like Parthenax.
I lurk in the shadows. Wait.
Which is actually pretty reasonable. We might save it for Parthenax. There's only 20
They've
cards
no
left in our
move we
deck.
can't anticipate.
Our opponent's essentially going to do what we just did with the old dig train. We'll probably do the same ourselves here.
Rise, my servant.
Must I do everything myself?
That is a pretty solid pull for us.
By surrender.
I will keep Sotha Sil's people alive.
And we're just going to go ahead and use it on the Necro. Alright. Apparition is a great play for our opponent. They get some value. They're going to get that Harpy back to their hand for even more shackle shenanigans here.
Let's dance.
We, however, are kind of at this point either just looking for Parthenax or Tazcad. So again, my list I keep Tazcad in it because of wacky things I run into on the ladder. This is a great example of when I would want a Tazcad because it can help close out games, but also on top of just like closing out games, it comes back pretty impressively as well. So I think we're just gonna go ahead and do that.
Repel the
And
outlanders.
this. And we've got a Necromancer here. A couple of different ways we can do this. We could use our big Necromancer to bring back a Shadowfen Priest to swing for 5. And then top deck Tazcad will just win without any weird sacrifice bring back from the dead. Also, it means that Viper gets us in there as well. So that is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and play the Necromancer to grab a Shadowfen Priest.
You must be cleansed.
Because it gives us a body on the board. We're going to go ahead and silence this and swing. And we're going to pass. So now they either have to win or gain health or guard up in both lanes with us having no way to remove it. Because Solitaire on a Danger Noodle is like a poor man's Tazcad. Also, top decking Tazcad works as well, but...
What have we here?
Seeing us do that, our opponent has to assume that that is the play we're going to make, right? We've telegraphed it. So they have to do something. But the good news for us is this 8/8 here also has to be dealt with as well. So he has to deal with the board and protect from potential charge damage. So it looks like he's going to opt to trade on that side, double guard up on the other side. Remember, they do have a Harpy.
Move we can't anticipate.
Harpy went back into the hand from Fleeting Apparition.
The Night Mother will guide us.
There is the health gain. There is the Harpy.
Waters of life.
And they add a third guard. Impressive. Alright, we have 14 Magicka, which is sadly not enough for us to get there with Tazcad and Danger Noodle combo. We're still one off even with Bat instead. We do not have an Uprising in hand, which would be pretty fun for a number of reasons. So I think that what we have to do here is get rid of a guard. Getting rid of either guard kind of doesn't matter because this is going to chew through the next one, so there's no point, I think, in not taking out one of these. And then the play, I think, is Tazcad. Mostly because you don't want them to play a Death Priest of their own and run that over. Could run something over here. I feel like running this over is actually pretty important because it gives us a rune and it denies them from getting more drain. So we're actually going to do it that way. Well, that is really unfortunate. That is a pretty brutal. In case he actually stabilizes here, we'll keep that. And we'll just do that to saturate. That's a pretty brutal prophecy, because that means that we cannot soul tear our Tazcad. Mummify is something that they do often run because they like to try to deal with Parthenax and similar things, but it's not the ideal hit for us. They have not yet gained health though, so again that's very good for us considering we have 7 reach as of right now. We actually have more than 7 reach should we so choose. We can get 6 from the Danger Noodle and 2 from the bat if we use the Necromancer. And we do have enough magicka to do that. So we can go as high as 8. I don't think that they crack this rune here. I don't see how they benefit from that.
We know.
I've been wrong before.
You must be cleansed.
Perhaps they think that they don't have a way to win without going face and then trying to set up a lethal for next turn, is maybe my guess. It's just really weird for them to make these plays. And that's it. We find a bat. And that's it. Obviously we got a number of different ways we could have closed that one out, but that's a win, so let's go ahead and dive into another game, see how things go. Alright, so we're going first against Redoran, it would seem. Kind of curious to see which style of Redoran this is, because I've been seeing a lot more like control Redoran lately, though mid-range is usually the flavor. It's a little bit better. Obviously in a matchup like this you'd prefer to see something like, you know, Word Wall, Drain Vitality, but early bodies are helpful. Probably don't want to Galen either of these if we can help it. We do, however, want to Galen a Necro, so that could be interesting. Ah, so they pass with the ring. So this is kind of either they had a bad opener and they're still on mid-range, or a telltale sign that it very well may be. Control Redoran. There's like a conscription version floating around, for example, that does also use Necromancer. And I've seen that in a couple of flavors too. One flavor I saw rather interesting ran Divine Fervor as well, because once you get a couple of Necromancers going, you play the first one, it enters play, and then they like kind of chain, which I thought was interesting.
My scales move in shadow.
Since they're not playing anything, and we have to assume this is probably some sort of control player,
I will keep
we're going to go ahead and pretend to be the beatdown here. So the thing that we do have to worry about is when we play that first Necromancer, if they have cast into time, they will eat all of our Galen Necromancers. So we have to be very stingy with our Necromancer in this matchup.
I smell the stench of the living.
Very stingy indeed.
The Nords must take back Skyrim.
Okay. So now we have a word wall. Do I really want to waste a Viper here just to save that Galen? Because my instincts say no, but the beatdown in me says yes. Largely because if it survives for 2 more turns and we catch an Uprising, then we can Galen something else again. I may have just talked to myself.
repel the Outlanders.
Because even just throwing on something like bats, getting a bunch of 5/5 chargers added to your deck as well isn't half bad. So
We must protect our stronghold.
Now time to fight.
well, that's unfortunate.
Attack.
If I fall,
I think we're just going to go ahead and do that and pass then. We do thankfully have one of our freshly Galened Necros. But again, we have to try to be kind of stingy with those if we can help it. This will not be a fast game by any means. This will be a knockdown, drag-out fight. We're also going to have to be stingy with our Drain Vitalities, I think, as well, because if this is the version I'm thinking it is that runs Necromancers and Doom Crags, it also runs Conscription, and as such,
my
we will need to deal with it appropriately. I think we just go ahead and do that. Ideally, we'd like to find something that lets us draw, which is again kind of why Uprising, while this is on the board, is appealing.
Believers shall flock to our noble cause.
Well, that's problematic. There's that draw we were looking for.
You must be cleansed.
That was a very, very worthwhile top deck for us.
Training is over. It's time to act.
Alright, we will
Justice of Akatosh!
almost certainly use an Uprising here. I was gonna say, the only way that it would have got better is if we drew a Shout, because then we could word wall an Uprising, but we get a Silence out of it, and we get to draw 2 more cards. I think that's entirely reasonable. Because this can silence this here, which allows us to get rid of the 5th Legion. Also, this is 100% certainly the Conscription version of the deck.
My scales are in shadow.
Still no Shouts, though.
Soldiers, form up!
Yep. So there's Praetorian. That's
We draw
also
power from
often
their
ran in this
blood.
version. Oh, that's not great for us.
Go no further.
That's not great for us at all. Ironically, I really wish we had 10 Magicka this turn. I would love to play this and a Death Priest, but
My scales are in shadow.
looks like we're gonna just have to settle for that and maybe double Death Priest next turn.
Don't let them break
The
our
problem
lines.
is that they don't really rely on large threats. We're 2 turns away from having to deal with Conscription. See what this gets us. A Skaven. Okay. So they have one card left, potentially Conscription. We don't know. We're just gonna go ahead and clear his board out. Also could have, again, Cast into Time is something that we have to worry about. Alright, thought thought about playing that, so that's certainly not a conscription.
I'll scout ahead.
I don't think we want the Viper here. I actually think digging is more appropriate. And ironically, we've still not found a lot here. I'd almost like to play a Necromancer, because he thought about playing this card here. Like, they moused it this way. So I don't think he has Cast into Time. So that, unless they top deck it, I think that a Necro might be a solid play. And I really kind of want to play it to draw a card. This is a gamble. I 100% acknowledge that. But we're about to shift into being the beatdown in the near future, so.
The Nords must take back Skyrim.
Orders?
Hermamora tests us.
Okay.
Time to fight. Talos!
So they have a mummy and a Nord. Let's see if this gets us first.
We can't anticipate.
I think you kind of have to take this at this point. We've ironically still found exactly 0 shouts as well. We're almost halfway through our deck and we've found none. No Greybeard Mentors, no Drained Vitalities, no Soul Tears. Very interesting. We're also kind of racing against time because, you know, conscription is a thing. They get a commander. Not exactly
Soldiers,
a shocking play
form up.
there. Strong chance we just go on the offensive here, though. Like, very strong chance we go on the offensive here, and then just end up playing Uprising.
Surrender or die. So predictable. My scales move in shadow. Ride my servant. Rise, my servant.
The Hist provides.
I think we'll take that.
I will keep
Bring back
Sylph's people
Galen
alive.
on one of our bats this time, because the Chargers, I think, is pretty important. So we did give him cards. We can probably conscription here if they want, but we've got a big enough board. Yeah. They only get 4 cards out of this, and we have a big enough board that it might not be that detrimental.
I'll clear a path.
Because again, we also still have another Uprising. So just kind of thinking about damage here. We've got 3,
The tribunal's
6.
lucky.
Oh, we're gonna see what happens here. Gets to fight something. Interesting he chose to fight that and not the Red Brahmin to get it off the board. Because we have 9 here, so we only have to do 10 more. So we go ahead and do that, and then we just Uprising again. So that goes to level 3. And we'll grab a Viper to get rid of the guard. And a Bat because we want to charge.
Surrender or die.
We're going to bring this as close as we can, and then get him down to 5. And that'll be it. So we still had even more that we could have done. We also had the Drain Vitality to like really slow down the board. They could have re-answered with another Conscription, but there you have it. That's another victory against another control deck. Hopefully you can kind of see some of the decision making there. Thanks for watching, and until next time, may you walk on warm sands.